Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. My name is Ralph and welcome back to London Zoo 1904, my recreation of London Zoo as it stood in the year 1904. It's one of those does what it says on the tin kind of titles. So we're going to do a couple of building tours today. We're going to do a bit of a double bill, look at the primate houses and London Zoo in 1904. So starting off, we're going to walk past these outdoor monkey cages. So this little collection of cages was originally built for crows, so it's more of an aviary. Not sure exactly when it was switched over to monkeys, but presumably at some point in the late 1800s, because outdoor monkey accommodation wasn't really the thing up until then. So these housed various sort of more hardy species of monkeys, so things like Japanese macaques, things like baboons. So yes, very happy when we finally got some baboons in game recently. So this is one that I built completely wrong to begin with. I really misinterpreted some references, which were actually of something completely different. And as far as I can tell, there is only one photo of these cages that seems to exist or to have survived to the modern day. So I was very pleased when I managed to see that, and I've completely rebuilt what I had. So those are our outdoor monkey cages, but that's just the starter. We're going to move on to the main course over here. So we're coming up to the monkey house here. So the monkey house was built in 1864, and it replaced an earlier monkey house, which was on a completely different area of the zoo. That was one of those things that was very openly disparaged in the guides just before it was demolished. Very much praised when it was new, awful as soon as it was about to close. So before we go in, we've got a couple of smaller outdoor cages. So again, these are for hardier monkeys, things like mandrills, things like macaques. So this is a large mandrill called George, who is actually slightly time traveling to be part of this recreation. So he came to the zoo in 1906. So he is here a little bit early, but all of the reference photos of this particular cage had George in, so he had to make an appearance. One of my favourite signs in the zoo: visitors are requested not to feed this animal with bread or buns. Presumably he was putting on a little bit of weight. So these outdoor cages were added in 1891. Up until that point, all of the monkeys were kept indoors. And again, that's because of that very Victorian attitude that these tropical animals just couldn't survive any contact with the cold whatsoever. So although the old monkey house had outdoor cages, this new one absolutely didn't. So when it first opened in 1864, the official guide described it as reproducing as nearly as can be the circumstances under which these animals live in their native haunts. Not sure I entirely agree with that. I think essentially what that meant is, look, we've got quite a lot of plants in here. Amazing. So the basic setup is there's these three very large cages in the middle. These were divided in half, but I'm not sure whether these would have been two separate displays or whether it was divided in half for the purposes of shifting them into one area so that you could clean the other and get them out of the way. So I've got them open in between. Whether they choose to use both sides or not is another matter. So one of these was for lemurs. And then it's not specifically said how the others were set up, but I've decided to have one for the New World monkeys, one for the Old World monkeys. So some more excellent signs in here. The keepers have strict orders to prevent visitors irritating the monkeys. Those are all taken from the references. Another animal that they had in here were fruit bats and flying foxes. So that was a bit of a puzzle for me for a while, because I had no idea where they would be. A walk through the zoological gardens, which is a sort of unofficial guide, describes them as being in the gangways between the great cages. And I wasn't sure what that could mean, but then there's these structures which were also a bit of a puzzle for me. Seems like one of the cages had this solid structure in there, which the others didn't. So originally I thought that maybe that was, again, it was a shelter for the monkeys, somewhere to shift them out of the way while they were cleaning. But then if it was something as important as that, why wouldn't all of the cages have them? So I have interpreted that as possibly being where the fruit bats were kept. I have no idea if that's accurate or not, but it seemed to me to be a sensible interpretation of how that could be used. Don't know. If anyone has any better ideas, feel free to let me know. Wouldn't be the first time I've made some edits to a structure with new information. So we have the 3 main cages in the middle, and then off on the side we've got these cages for other species which don't play so well with others. So I've generally signed those as smaller species, things like marmosets, things like tamarins. A couple of these have got some of Drax's little prop creatures in there. So got squirrel monkeys in here. And then round the back, I've not built this because I couldn't find any references and it's all behind closed doors. But I did read a reference in one of my books that behind the scenes, some of the tamer monkeys were kept and people could go and say hello to them. Children could go and play with the monkeys. It was a different time. So out the other side, we have got our another outside cage for the Chelly monkey. It's a kind of macaque. So that was the first outdoor cage that was built, which sort of proved that they could survive outside. So although we've got some windows open, can't imagine ventilation would have been the best in there. I've been to a couple of places that have their indoor monkey area with some mesh, so you're sort of in the same space as the monkeys, and they are very smelly places. So I have to think that this would have been one of the worst smelling places in the zoo, especially because these doors were swing doors, so that they would stay closed to keep the heat in. So a hot conservatory full of monkeys that spend their entire lives indoors, yes, must have been pretty ripe in there. So just across from the monkey house, we have got the ape house. So this is one of the newest buildings in the zoo. So this was built in 1902, and this is very much kind of the last hurrah of the Victorian zoo. This was the last building to be built under the old administration. And this was the home to the great apes, the anthropoid apes, as they were called. Quite a simple structure. So these 4 interior cages, again, often described as large, which I don't think I would agree with. And they're separated from the viewing public by a big glass screen. So that not only means that the area that the apes are in can be kept at a higher temperature than the public area, but it also serves to protect the apes from human diseases, which was a big problem for them. Although, again, being sort of the last relic of the previous administration, openly disparaged in the official guide. So the official guide of 1904 says, "It is doubtful if the apes do not lose in spirits as much as they gain in freedom from infection, as they are extremely curious and inquisitive and like to make friends with the visitors." So it was sort of noted that the apes did tend to kind of mope in here a little bit. And that's true in the recreation as well. So there's something to do with the traversable area. These areas are just too small for them to properly calculate a traversable area. So although they have got some climbing equipment in here, they can't access it for some reason. So it's all gone a little bit wonky. I'm sort of fighting against how the game should work here. So 1904 is actually the only year in which gorillas lived in this house. So gorillas did not do well in zoos in the 1800s and early 1900s. It wasn't really until the sort of 1930s and onwards that they really were viable to keep in zoos at all. To the point that actually London Zoo actively discouraged collectors from going out and getting gorillas because they just knew that they weren't able to take care of them properly. So before this point, there had been 2 gorillas, neither of which lived particularly long, matter of weeks. Just got sick and died, basically, very sadly. So in 1904, there were 2 young gorillas, one named Venus and one named Chloe, who arrived on the 19th of August. And to give you an idea of how dire things were for gorillas at that time, Venus died on the 29th of August and Chloe not long after on the 19th of September. So they did not survive here long at all, unfortunately. Despite best efforts. So, yes, not the best facilities for apes. And again, I think these cages possibly should be divided somewhat to help with shifting them around for cleaning, but it was hard enough getting the apes in-game in the space provided, let alone halving it. So I've got a little bit of an idea of what the... we'll just hop across there, teleport a little bit. We've got a little bit of an idea of what this little service corridor looked like because there are written descriptions. In 1916, an orangutan called Jacob managed to unpick the wire of the cage and escaped into this corridor, used a potted plant... So we know there was a potted plant, to smash a map of the gardens, so we know there was a map of the gardens, and one of the skylights. He then climbed out and made a nest in a nearby lime tree. And it was remarked that it was amazing that although he'd been taken from the wild at a very young age, he still had he had learnt how to make a nest out in the wild. So he made a nest in the tree and then was coaxed back into his cage with a fire extinguisher. Again, different time, not necessarily how we'd do things these days. So that little corridor is only supposed to just about hold up from the outside. But then going on round, there is a basement to the ape house as well, which had more cages. I've not really fully detailed that because I've had to mostly fill it with earth in order for the upper level to work. So again, only supposed to just about read from the outside. So the smaller apes were kept in that basement area. There is a young chimpanzee running around here being looked after by a keeper. I'm sure must be hiding in the bushes somewhere. So the year after, 1905, some outdoor cages were built which connected to those basement windows, and some large gibbons spent the winter outside of that year, which again showed that those animals were capable of surviving those lower temperatures, which in earlier times they were just thought they couldn't survive at all. So things did move forward for the better shortly after 1904, but that's part of the reason that I chose this year, is that this is really, as I say, the last hurrah of the Victorian Zoo, so the most complete version of what the zoo looked like in at the turn of the century, before some very big changes made it more recognisably modern after that time. So there we are. That is the accommodation for primates in the year 1904. So the monkey house was demolished in 1925 to make way for a new monkey house, which survived until the 70s. So that was demolished in the 70s to make way for the Sobel pavilions, which were built 1970 to 1972. And then in 2007, the Sobel pavilions were transformed into Gorilla Kingdom. So very similar situation to the Lion House becoming the new Lion Terraces, becoming Land of the Lions. So this area was a complex for all sorts of primates, all sorts of monkeys, all the great apes. And then that entire space was converted for use by just gorillas. And funnily enough, this is being recorded in December of 2024. Earlier this year, in February of 2024, a baby gorilla was born whose name was Venus. So we've got a baby Venus at the zoo at the moment, who is doing a lot better than the previous Venus. Goes to show just how far things have come in 120 years. So the ape house was demolished also in 1925, 1926 to make way for the new reptile house, the famous reptile house. And in fact, part of the ape house basement still survives in the basement of the reptile house. So the bones of it are there if you know where to look. So there we are. That is the monkey house and the ape house. As always, if you've got any questions, jot them down in the comments down below and I'll get back to you. If there's anything you particularly liked, anything that you think you'd like to see more of, like to see less of, let me know down in the comments. I am still learning. This is, still early days. So yeah, let me know. We'll have a bit of a chat about it. And I realise that I don't have a particularly predictable release schedule. So do subscribe if you want to know when the next video comes out, because, well, I'd like to find out when the next video is going to come out as well. But thank you very much for tuning into this one, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you very much. Bye.